I am watching the new Borat film as it happens. In that, as usual, Borat is very quirky, to say the least. Quirky, very quirky. No, quirky. Anyway, yes, very, yeah, very. It's a strange kind of humor, yes, isn't it? I mean, I don't think I've seen it many other times, generally. Clearly, though, he's influenced by some things. Now, the one thing I could think of, especially with some earlier scenes, is the fact that, um, so, like, for example, right, there are those Japanese horror films that really try to amp it up, right? So they go from, horror that has just a bit of gore to horror that has, in fact, you know what they're called, splatters, So they really amp it up, right? Not necessarily, much more horrifying. Just, has a lot more gore for some reason. Can turn from being supposedly terrifying to comical. In the sense, I think Borat is doing something similar here, such as this, in terms of comedy, though, as opposed to just horror. He's doing something similar. But then not too dissimilar to some other things. But I'm not entirely sure specifically what else there is I've seen so far. At least there might be, but what else there is that is similar to this specifically? There are elements, though, like when it comes to the sexual aspects in his movies. Well, there's a lot of movies like that for that. But obviously, not movies like that for that. It also include social along with political elements. You know, like American Pie has a lot of sexual stuff, but not practically none of the rest. But otherwise, it does have penises and breasts and talk of those. But it's not so much satire. It's more just a plain, mundane, almost brain dead comedy, as it happens. The same with like road trip or such, very similar sort of. Uh, in fact, that's somewhat similar because it has some religious elements that I don't think American Pie has. Think unless I mean, maybe it has very small amounts, but doesn't quite feature. Well, there weren't many road trips anyway, so yeah. There's also, though, an element from the aforementioned horror, interestingly. So, there was one I watched. Um, I forgot the name of exactly, but let me see. Maybe I could find it. And what it did have, though, was the chair scene. You know which chair scene, right? Now, yeah, I was thinking, where did he possibly get that idea from? I'm assuming, many people, since this movie is probably going to be popular, probably more popular. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, where they originated it, maybe it wasn't original there, but but I was wondering, where he got the idea from, and yeah, I have seen this before. I've definitely seen this before. In this Japanese splatter movie. Now it's Barat isn't exactly a splitter, but clearly he was watching that or some other thing that origin. I don't know, one of those things, I guess. And he decided to do it in a comical fashion, but in reality, it's really a horror trope, isn't it? He obviously did it comically, though, or tried to. Um, it's still a horror trope in a way, but they went on along with it very quickly. Um, there's a bit added to it from what I've watched before, but otherwise it's still Yeah. So I think it was this original movie that I'm thinking of. Possibly, though I'm not entirely sure. Either Tokyo Gore Police, as the name implies, or I don't think it was Machine Gun Girl. Um, Wild movies. So wild, I haven't watched them in a while because they're a bit too wild, sometimes. And honestly, the splatter doesn't really, I mean, it's mainly just disgusting. I mean, it's not exactly, but the imagination, I give them that. They have a lot of imagination. Not so much with the splatter. Splatter is just splatter. When it comes to, like, in fact, this was one of them. When this guy went to this place which had uh, some sort of some form of prostitution, but then they ended up trying to cut off his dick. So yeah, not that specifically is imaginative. Other instances, so how they drew what? Yeah, not drew, how they costumes the characters. I think it was though Tokyo Go Police, possibly, or Mutant Girl Squad. So one of these, yeah, likely. Other than that, I'm not entirely sure what else. But anyway, irrelevant. So, in terms of where this though, Borat second, the second is funny. So, no, he is funny in some instances. Like, well, there are a few instances. Yeah. Okay, so one of the funniest scenes I thought was when he said that he wanted to fax, hmm? As if somehow fax is still used. The premiere. Now, I mean, I don't know if this is a Borat sort of humor, but I thought it was brilliant. I mean, it's not conventional like the rest of the humor, but the way it was built up was a great joke. I thought because first he said he wants to fax a premiere, and what he did he want to fax him? Yeah, three letters, sup. Just that's brilliant, right? Like I don't know, I found it so funny. That's the funniest thing I found so far. So far, I'm only on the 22nd minute, so there's a lot more. Yeah, yeah, but so far, so good. Yeah, Borat, yeah, Borat. It's incredible how he's able to change his accent. As far as I know, he has a British accent, but somehow he really able to change it. Just change it. And yeah, and he makes these uh, subtle reflective humor, one can call it, I suppose. Um, you know, it is, though. It needs a bit of reflection, which I suppose some people might not do. So, but it's otherwise. I mean, it's still there, though. There, and the one thing I don't know is if the people he meets are really not scripted in. I mean, the guy in the effects store seemed a bit scripted. Other than that, though, the others seem somewhat genuine. But the reactions and everything. But the guy in the fax store, yeah, suspicious about him. I still found it funny though how he just wanted to fax up. I cannot deny that. That's funny. Um, but yeah, otherwise, yeah. Hmm. Um, I've watched the first Borat years ago, many years ago, like about a decade ago or something. Yeah, it obviously came out like 14 years ago now. I didn't quite watch it that long ago, but I watched the first one. Yeah, quite many years ago. I don't suppose it really matters if one watches it again or not. When one watches the second, it's just, it's not really a continuation of the story. It's just, but yeah, um, he is funny in a very weird way, right? It just is. and interesting as well in some other way. But just like for example, so when he pointed at a couple of mannequins at one point. I mean, he could have said, some people would say, what he said, and it wouldn't be humoristic, right? It wouldn't be on its own. But as soon as he pointed to those mannequins, that just injected the humor into it, and it changed the scene. So in that sense, sort of like that stuff moment, it really changed the scene and made it humorous. Whereas if you just have the words on their own without the pointing, then it wouldn't be. But that's how it's reflective, though. It's able to transform a scene as opposed to just say something as a statement of opinion and that's it, full stop. Now that would be comedy. But if you extend it and contrast it with what came before, it becomes comedy. Not like many other comedies, but many other comedies do not have this sort of thing where, okay, American pies are very direct, for example. They don't quite, they rely a lot on shame and such, which, this does as well. But there's also other types of comedy which builds upon it. And, so it's still interesting in that sense. Now, with regards to that a baby scene, yeah, inside that place with the pasta. Um, wow. Yeah, I know. I said I found it that bit with sub funniest of it. I think this one eclipsed it. So I don't know. Just wow. The way he set it up is incredible. Everything he said really had a double meaning, and yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that so-called pasta was really genuinely had no idea about any of this. That was so funny though. Way everything happened, and I mean this is I don't know. I just the laugh out loud comedy potential of what Sasha does is quite something. I don't know what else there is, but to be funnier than this would be quite difficult. But, well, there probably is something funnier, but yeah, I mean, now she ends up straining and whatnot. I don't suppose this would be funny. But whereas most other such movies which rely on crude humor and such end up uh, vomiting it or something. There's usually vomit. Like, even if there is vomit here, though, a little bit with the so-called pasta. The script was so well crafted. The double entendres were so brilliant that just lends itself. It's so works for comedic purposes. It just does. I had no idea how it just happens. It just happens to be so funny. Just one of those things. Then the so-called pastor is astonished that he's her father, but the way it was built up, the fact that he said it would be our little secret for some reason, you know, when he first says it, the audience doesn't quite know why he's saying it exactly because it doesn't make much sense. Obviously, if you construct this alternate reality of his, then I guess you'd think, but in the context then of what he tells the pastor, it makes perfect sense in that context, to be our little secret as a double entendre. It makes much more sense, and it's just so funny. But yeah, it is such satire. Um, like that. Like, all right. So like at the the plastic surgery bit wasn't it very funny, but what it did is satirical at best. Like I think the key of the satire lay in the fact that he handed out cash, as most people would pay by a debit card, but he really wanted to show all of that displayed there for a reason. I mean, it wasn't incredibly comical, but he clearly wanted to show this the surfeit of both artificiality and, in the sense, capitalism, which enables this artificiality. And people could presumably, unless people already want to have these procedures, they generally don't even know how much they cost, and they cost an incredible amount for surgery that is ultimately dangerous and potentially unhealthy. Um, yeah, I'm not entirely sure why someone would pay thousands to potentially get infected. Hmm. Yeah, I might pay thousands to not get infected. Thank you very much. So that's that. I mean, it wasn't really funny, but it still made a point. On the other hand, what I think is happening is that he is obviously, as mentioned earlier, he amps up the satire mainly, which potentially can create this comic effect, but it is mainly satire still. And because of that, most people end up, like, there are a few people who respond something like this, something that is sort of the norm, like, we do not do A, we do B. But many other people, especially if they're non-action comments per se, actually go along with it. They do not actually say much more, but it's like they acknowledge um, the spectrum of this, of how far he is going. Some, though, actually even acknowledge it at very least. They don't necessarily go even further. So far, Borat is the one who really goes the furthest, and he does that on purpose. And then people change direction or revert back to normality, like the seated doctor, for example, well, surgeon. Uh, they just revert to normality. But I think this highlights, that people are either seemingly automatons to whatever is said, if it's, like a generic comment that Borat says, which, highlights the automated aspect of most people's reactions per se, or they even acknowledge it or concur, but then they don't go further so far. So I think this highlights the satirical aspects. They don't necessarily, laugh out loud funny or anything. Whereas the scene with the baby was both. Really, it was a very funny scene, but it was also very much satirical. But ultimately, it really combined the comedy along with the social critique. So yeah, it's interesting no matter what he does is interesting, and what this movie of his also does clearly is show how uh, seemingly easy disguises can be. I mean, incredibly effective. If he wants to put on weight, he puts on weight. If he wants to become another person, he becomes another person. Um, if he wants, yeah, it, he really does cosplay, doesn't he? Just uh, I don't think he did that in the first Borat, but yeah, generally he does do something like this. Otherwise, so yeah, it's so far it's interesting and comic in other parts. And yeah, sure enough, in the end, after all is watched, personally, I thought that scene with the baby was still the funniest because of how it happened, the double entendres and everything, despite all the uh, everything that happened afterwards, that still I was still pretty good. Um, yeah, it seems like he wanted it to be different. He wanted the sequel to be different as opposed to the original, which was a more of a mockumentary. This was as well, but he clearly wanted it to be some sort of thriller for some reason, or at least the music indicated that he intended to be some sort of thriller, and obviously more like thriller comedy or whatever, quite funny, everything that's happened at the end, um, when he was when yeah when everything that happened anyway, yeah, but, quite interesting, yeah. um, I thought the concert thing, thought that was really the weakest part. I mean, um, you know, uh, it's not quite satire. I thought it's just, I suppose, revealing, but it doesn't quite work as satire. Satire really needs something on top of reality usually, and he does do satire usually. He does, but that didn't quite have much. But yeah, it seems like he did. In fact, as I read here, it seems like he did mostly do this without telling anyone, apparently, um, which is quite something. I was thinking, how I thought that the person in the fax shop, presumably, seemed scripted, but no, apparently he wasn't, possibly, which is quite something because I don't know. I mean, okay, it's a simplistic sort of scene, so it doesn't quite require, but somehow it seems scripted. I don't know, but it wasn't apparently. Well, I'm not sure. Anyway, from the little bit here, um, so possibly, possibly only he and his supposed daughter were really acting. Possibly, apparently, they named the supposed Kazakhstan premiere on the real one, or at least his last name apparently is real. So yeah, I liked how, so in the thrilling spirit, they decided to conclude the movie with how they decided to uh, make Borat supposedly the patient zero. That's just brilliant. I mean, they didn't exactly go much further than that after that, but um, kind of funny as well as it happened. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's not a real thriller, but the fact that they did that, obviously they began filming this in 2019, so presumably they scripted it as they went along. If it does indeed have a script, maybe I'm assuming, considering the nature and the structure of this, uh, that they only had outline, presumably, not the whole script as such. I mean, yeah, most actual movies do normally have a whole script, presumably before they start filming, but not this, I'm assuming, because they indeed included it as an ending. I mean, if they couldn't have had that as an ending in 2019, obviously, uh, with COVID still being unknown. Yeah, and so it, the whole thing was funny as usual. Um, I think possibly funnier than the original, although I've seen it years ago, so I can't quite remember the minutiae. But this was quite funny. I mean, I've also seen Bruno and the Dictator. I don't remember though them being as funny, but as it has been years as well since I've watched them, so I cannot quite tell. Hmm. Let's just say I have certainly laughed more than any American Pie. I mean, the comedy there is usually mediocre. So yeah, he is effective at comedy specifically, and that's the point of it, isn't it? I suppose.